Good afternoon, ladies and gents. It's the 11th of September, 2024, and we're going to have a discussion just to clarify what NATO is and has been doing to prepare for a world war against Russia. Just to be clear, though, the West are also preparing for war in other regions around the world, but today we'll just be concentrating on Russia. But before we get started, as I've just said, it's the 11th of September. I just want to remember, or us to remember, all the lives lost during the September 11th attack on the World Trade Centers in New York back in 2001. Again, guys, I'm going to be throwing up some slides through this session. Apologies for this format, but for this playlist of videos, I'm creating the foundation, an archive of default principles that everyone needs to understand. If you're going to take any of what's going on around you seriously, I promise you, though, that when we sort of move on to the daily news updates, if and when those situations change around the world, videos will be a lot shorter. That's my videos. They're going to be a lot shorter. They're going to be straight to the point and only covering breaking news on that day. Thank God I hear some of you saying. But the reason why these are lengthy, guys, is because this is really just a knowledge base. It's information that, you can sort of jump into when you've got a bit of time or you're interested in a given subject. My only advice, and I'll put this out on other videos, try and watch my foundation, the first 20 videos in some kind of logical order, as in video 1 to video 20. Don't bounce all over the place because they've been created and published logically. There seems to be a load of people online across social media at the moment yapping on about how the West should be authorizing the use of Western supplied long range missiles to be used against sort of counterforce and countervalue targets deep inside Russia. That's authorizing the Ukraine to use such weapons. There are people going on also about how NATO aren't doing much or holding back or taking time to deliver, train, and authorize many different military decisions in support for Ukraine or some other rubbish. So just to clarify what's going on, I just wanted to sort of point out these facts to you today. Once you've finished this session, or once I've finished this session, you've listened to it, hopefully you can bear with it till the end. You'll have a full understanding. Well, you'll know without a doubt that NATO and the West haven't been sat on their asses doing fuck all. And in fact, have been planning for something a lot bigger than you think. They say there is a long-term plan to deal with Russia in the war against Ukraine, and that sounds as stupid as it looks when you're reading it. Of course, there's a long-term plan. But believe me, guys, there are people out there that believe NATO and the West are, and have been for the last 2.5 years, sat there twiddling their thumbs, reading newspapers and playing Candy Crush on their phones. And I'm here to tell you otherwise. Before I lose you guys, though, I'm going to provide you with a summarized update on what the West has been doing so far and over the last 2 to 3 years, and where we are in preparation with the global war that is possibly going to kick off. I say possibly, I emphasize possibly, because I don't know. I make that last statement seriously because if it happens, it will probably be a crisis that, you won't be quick to forget. There's so much going on and has gone on over the last 2 years. It doesn't bear thinking about. And of course, it's all right or it's all right for me, actually, because I've been tracking the Ukraine war now for the last 930 days. Yep, since day one, back in February 2022. That was one of the most important decisions I made, actually, to track the war. And the reason I'd done that is because on that fateful day, I knew from that point on that the security of Europe was at risk. Ukraine is only 1,180 miles away from Great Britain. So that's from Dover to Lviv in Western Ukraine. And a drive in a car that would only take you 20 hours. And with that, and like most of you out there, you'll be responsible for people. So I have a missus, a kids, and a family to think about. And therefore, under no circumstances could I just ignore this. 930 days is a long time. But to be honest with you, it's gone quick. There were horrible things happening in Ukraine from the off, only 3 days into the war or the invasion, at that time in a town called Bucha. whereby 458 bodies had been recovered following the mass murder of civilians and POWs, so that's prisoners of war, by the Russian armed forces during that fight. So yeah, that was for the occupation of the city. But there were things that happened there I'd prefer not to talk about on this channel, actually, just out of respect for those that went through it. 930 days watching, listening, and reading mountains of information from people in those countries on the ground. Announcements made by many government officials across the region. The sheer amount of changes to military postures across the European theatre, which is critically important, because those changes you can't hide, guys. And that's what I'm going to be talking about really predominantly in this session. The military postures changing across Europe. You cannot hide that from the human eye. So that's it. Keeping an eye on, I've got mountains, not got, I've gone through mountains of video footage of, and I know this sounds morbid, guys, but, people being tortured, mutilated, and killings on both sides of the war. But then war is cruel and ugly, guys. So we'll leave it there for now, and let's get on. What this has provided me with is a wealth of knowledge and understanding on not just that conflict, but also I've been actually sucked into other conflicts around the world, such as the one still bubbling away in the Middle East, and others in Asia. Just because we don't hear about them on the mainstream media, doesn't mean it's not, well, it doesn't mean it's not happening. I'm going to be blunt with you guys, not because I want to scare the shit out of you, but because I feel it's my duty as a human being to do so. NATO and other countries that are not currently a member state of the NATO alliance. So you've got your 33 member states, but there are other countries. Those countries and NATO are preparing for all-out war with Russia. It's as simple as that. You can do whatever you want with that information, but I'm telling you this because for the last 930 days, I've seen the NATO alliance preparing for this war. I'm not making it up, and it's just what's happening across Europe at the moment. And it has been for the last 2.5 years. Since just a quick, this is a little bit of history, very, very quick, very, very short, but you need to understand this because it's all right, us watching and listening, people giving their verdicts and opinions and whatever on the news that, Russia are invading Ukraine. It'd be nice to kind of understand the possibilities in terms of why he's doing that or why they're doing that. So just quickly, since the fall of the Soviet Union back in 1991, the lowering of that Soviet, was it the hammer and sickle flag, was witnessed for the last day on Christmas Day, or was it the 26th of December in 1991? Anyway, it's pretty much Christmas Day. It's been Russia's intent, or at the very least Putin's intent, to regain some, if not all, of those territories lost during that collapse. That being the 15 republics that made up the USSR at the time. And guys, Russia invaded Georgia back in 2008, one of the countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union. Russia has kicked off with Armenia and Azerbaijan, but I think that was more fighting against Islamists. So we'll leave that one aside. Russia invaded Crimea. Many of you that have been tracking this will be familiar with the Crimean War 10 years ago, back in 2014. And again, now an all-out invasion of Ukraine. With the latest invasion, we have to assume that the goal here is to regain those lost countries. And with that, we have to look at what countries we're talking about. Now, this is important, okay? You'll understand why in a minute. The 15 republics, or the countries that all gained independence following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. So there's 15 countries, they all gained independence, and that was the breaking up of, or the starting of the West, the western part of Russia, breaking up into smaller chunks. Chechnya. Russian military established control over Chechnya in late April 2000. So it's 24 years ago, after losing the first invasion 4 years prior to that in 96. It's not one of those independent countries, however, but still an invasion of another country. Georgia. The Russo-Georgia War in 2008. when Russia invaded Georgia. Crimea back in 2014, just mentioned that when Russia invaded Crimea and still occupies it today. Ukraine, of course, we have the invasion of Ukraine 2.5 years ago in 2022, which is still raging on today. So war strategists are saying the following other countries that were also part of the Soviet Union at the time, that being Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Moldova. They're also in Putin's crosshairs, and if Putin was successful there, then he would most likely move on to the eastern part of that area or that region. Countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. I'm not sure if I said them correctly or not. If I didn't, I apologize. So whilst people are sat there, or just sitting around wondering, what the fuck Putin's up to. Well, there you have it. It looks like he wants to rebuild the Soviet Union. It's as simple as that. He has started, and today it doesn't look like he's got any intentions of stopping until, of course, either all of those 15 republics are back under the Russian umbrella, or, of course, Putin is stopped and completely put out of the game. These let me just show you this quickly. So this slide that's up here, that top left one, that was I think that was NATO's. So the dark blue, that's going to be the member states and the military structure of NATO back in 1950s, shall we say. The one to the bottom right, you can see USSR, which incorporates Eastern Germany, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, Romania, Hungary, and those sort of countries. 1991, that top left, again, Russia, or the USSR up until 1991. So that's October 1991, a month or so before the USSR collapsed. You can see that, there's Belarus, Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and also Kaliningrad, the tiny little, can you see the point? So that's Kaliningrad. So you can see what's happening here. So he's coming to Ukraine. He's got Crimea down the bottom here. We've got Moldova on the side here. So it looks like, yeah, I mean, Belarus is pretty much in his pocket anyway, but you can see what's happening here. And this is, I don't know. Listen, I don't, unless you're going to sit down and talk to Putin, we're not going to know. But, it looks like there's an agenda here, and there's been an agenda for a long, long time. There's also a threat from NATO coming in from the west, moving across closer to the Russian border and taking control of territory. Listen, guys, I've said it in the videos before. Most wars are fought over territory and or religion. Moving over to December 1991, so the USSR collapsed and it was changed to Russia. Now, those light pink ones are the ones that started becoming independent. And then we go down to 1992 in June. You can see now they're not part of USSR. USSR actually no longer exists. It's now just Russia. So all of these countries here are independent. Now, if we move across again, 1994 in May, these countries are now going light blue. Partnership for Peace, but that's a step before becoming an individual partner or member of NATO. 1994, September, we can see that Sweden and Finland are in the mix as well now. So you can see a shift across Europe, okay? And then today, or 2022, this is March. So you can see now that Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine are in the anyway. You can see that the dominance is becoming NATO's across Europe, and I don't think Russia or Putin are happy with it. Just I've mentioned Chechnya back in April 2000 when Russia invaded them. Georgia back in 2008. That was an invasion there. Then we had the Crimea and also Ukraine. Right, one country I haven't listed or haven't mentioned, and that is Belarus. See, Putin needs Belarus on his side right now. So he's not likely to be invading them anytime soon, certainly whilst they're sort of living in each other's sort of pockets at the moment. But believe me, Putin wouldn't hesitate to invade Belarus if he needed to. And his long-term objective will be to ensure that Belarus also are fully back under that Russian umbrella. What I'm going to, or what I'm not going to do is sit here and say, though, is that there's going to be a world war because for obvious reasons, guys, I don't have that information. I don't work for the government, intelligence, nor the military, so I don't have the answer to the very question that is, excuse me, on the lips of everyone else around the world at the moment, and that is there going to be an all-out war with Russia and or World War III? What I can say though, and this is with a high level of confidence, and that is, do I believe there's going to be an all-out war with Russia? Now, this is my opinion, guys. Before I say this, this is what I think. Right at this very moment today, on the 11th of September 2024, unfortunately, yes. Because quite frankly, if I didn't, then I wouldn't be sat here wasting mine or your time talking a load of bollocks to you guys when you've got a lot better things to be getting on with. But there are so many other things going on around the world that are also influencing this and other conflicts around the globe. One thing that could change this, again, this is my opinion, guys. This is nobody else's, this is mine. You can take it or leave it. But one thing that could change this, and when I say change, I actually have no idea what I mean. For the better, for the worse, who knows? But I'm trying to keep a very close eye on the elections in the US, which I believe is in November, only a matter of weeks away. As I think the result of those elections could really change the whole dynamics of not only the Ukraine war, but also conflicts unfolding in other regions. I don't know American politics, so I'm definitely not going to sit here and talk, talk about it. I just don't know. I don't know anything about the American politics, but I really I've got I've got I don't know. I've got a feeling that, and it doesn't matter which way it goes, but I've just got a feeling that there's going to be a turn of events in one or more of these conflicts after the election, the US election in November. So, guys, I've kind of gone off track again, but not really. There's no good me talking about what NATO and the West are doing and have been doing to prepare for the war with Russia if no one's got any idea why they're even having the war in the first place. This is all information that I picked up myself first so that I can sort of better understand what's going on. There are too many people out there with absolutely no idea. So I just urge you to either watch this video or videos like this, or just get out there and research some of this information yourselves to improve your knowledge. And before we finish off, well, before we finish off, I haven't even started talking about what NATO is doing to prepare for the war yet. But I'll keep it brief. And the only reason we need to know this information is because, ladies and gents, we want to know whether anything's going to happen that is likely to turn mine and your worlds upside down. That is really the only reason for me, so that I can adequately prepare for those possible impacts and those outcomes. I've seen it all roll out in front of our eyes. And guys, as preppers, we're here to encourage the viewers on how to prep. But firstly, there has to be a reason. And there has to be a valid reason as to why, we should be prepping. The prepping business takes time, effort, and money for those of you that have got it. I seriously believe that all out war is being planned. I say planned. It's being planned. I was going to say in capital letters, it's being planned. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to show you in a minute, against Russia. As this is evident with the military postures sort of changing across Europe, we've got Russia invading Ukraine. It's a neighbor, and no matter what the beef is with your neighbor, you cannot go and invade that country. That is like me falling out with my next door neighbor, who's always playing loud music and continues to let his bloody dog bark all day long. So instead of knocking on the front door and discussing the issue, instead I'll knock on the door, I'll pull out a gun, and I'll tell them all to get out of the house because I'm moving in. That's it. That's an invasion on the neighbour. If I went and done that now, the police are likely to turn up at the house and the neighbour's friends and family to sort the situation out. Exactly what NATO and the West have to do with Putin. You cannot let countries just go waltzing into other countries and just taking the land. Okay, that's the sort of shit that went on 2000 years ago. And it's happening today. So if we let this happen today, then nobody's learnt a damn thing over, hundreds, if not thousands of years. So, you know, that's what I'm saying, guys. If anyone around the world is seen to be allowing this to happen, then it gives the green light for others to do the same. It's unethical, it's unjust, and it simply portrays the character of a bully. And that, ladies and gents, is why the West cannot allow this to happen, because Russia or Putin is not going to stop there. The West let Putin get away with it, doing exactly the same back in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. And we cannot allow it to happen again, guys. And for Russia to get away with it, it's just not happening. It's just not happening. That's it. It doesn't matter what politics you want to look at. It's just we can't be seen to be doing nothing. Okay, and that's it. Just that piece of information alone surely must tell people that there's a very high possibility of all-out war. Surely people out there know and understand that the West are not going to just sit back and let this happen. Surely, guys, you cannot honestly be sat there thinking that Russia, or what Russia's doing actually is right. But let's not get pulled into the politics of the conflict. Right, let's move on to the evidence, shall we say? That's what I'm going to call it. As we speak, NATO have been and continue to scale out the current NATO infrastructure across the entire European Eastern Alliance, because without it, NATO cannot deliver such assets. The scale of this operation doesn't bear thinking about, having to factor in so many variables and requirements. The plan, the plans look like this. There's 5 new transportation routes from different parts of Europe to the Russian border. Each route is focused on transportation of military assets across the oceans, the land, and through the air, with particular focuses on major European ports, movement corridors that are imperative to the workings of the NATO alliance. For the first time in 35 years, NATO now have new war plans in place, with new force and readiness models, which provide NATO with a 700% more troop available to the alliance itself. However, there are many potential targets being created, making up the infrastructure. So that's going to be vulnerable to strikes and attacks. To counteract these threats, the alliance's network is being created with redundancy in place. So an example of redundancy is going to be, it's like the landing and the taking off exercises of F-35 fighter jets on the highways and motorways across Europe. Redundant, why? Because military air bases across Europe will become primary counterforce targets for Russia. And NATO will need to still be able to operate its air force capabilities. And that's it. So that's a level of redundancy. Hope that example made sense. With the 2 new NATO members joining the alliance recently, that being Sweden and Finland, and it's an expansion of the network. NATO assets, they can now be sort of shipped into Western Norway from the Atlantic for the first time in years. The US shipped, I think it was 200 armored vehicles and 300 supply containers into Port Narvik in Norway, taking 1,600 US Army soldiers, traveling 880 kilometers eastwards towards Poland by roads and rail, testing these routes for validation. Obviously, before Sweden and Finland joined the alliance, that option wasn't even possible. Unfortunately, though, this trip would take around 14 hours, a long time to travel, potentially exposed, and also the logistics at the ports consuming resources. However, there are two other ports located in Germany. So that's Port Bremerhaven and Port Hamburg, which are now key ports to the alliance's infrastructure. Both of these ports are huge and can process this is from 370 pieces of armored vehicles through its ports in only 14 hours. So what they use the large roll-on, roll-off transport ships, which are used to transport large amounts of military assets. Some ships carrying over 1,000 military pieces, and then transporting them from the ports to the eastern flanks of Poland by rail directly from those ports. We then have Poland bolstering its infrastructure in terms of the railways and road networks. There is the A2 roadway spanning 1,000 kilometers from west to east, and that goes through Germany and Poland. And it's the fastest route by far to the Russian border. However, looking back at the vulnerabilities on this route, there are a couple of key expansion bridges along the route, easy targets, I suppose, for the enemy. However, NATO engineer brigades can provide quick reaction flotilla bridges as a secondary measure if any of these critical bridges were to be taken out. So Poland have also been strengthening their bridges along that A2 route, so that bridges can take the increased weight of transporters moving heavy vehicles such as tanks across those bridges and along that route. The planning takes into account not just one motorway as an axis of movement through Germany, but also many motorways of federal highways. NATO are no longer talking about these plans, guys. They're actually building out this infrastructure as we speak. They're readying themselves for all-out war. So, to give you an idea of the assets that will need to be moved through different countries across the whole alliance, there are 32 member states or member countries, shall we say. Giving you a population, collectively this is NATO, population of 980 million people, with 3.3 million active duty troops. And between the countries, they have access to 22,000 aircraft, 2,250 naval ships, and 870,000 ground combat vehicles, with 11,000 of them being main battle tanks. The numbers are appetizing, but completely useless if you cannot move those assets out from the ports, airfields, and other sort of bases around Europe. These numbers, ladies and gents, overshadow Russians' capabilities, easily doubling, if not trebling numbers, across the board, really, across all of those assets. America has a robust rail network in place across Central America. So making up a strategic, it's a strategic rail network which contains, no, it doesn't contain, it connects to 193 military bases across the US, with sea ports on both east and west coasts. The problem arises, though, when they have to move those assets from the US to Europe, taking about 3 weeks to cross the Atlantic. So the roll-on, roll-off, or the ro-ro ships, as they're known, are perfect for this task. Some of these ships being able to transport, like I've just said earlier, up to 1,300 military assets or vehicles, including aircraft, which is an entire military brigade combat team in one single shipment. There are 5 ro-ro ships dedicated to the European theatre at the moment, with the ability to move and deploy up to 5 brigades or 20,000 troops and kit to Europe within 3 to 6 months. But then the vulnerabilities and threats increase, obviously, once those ships hit the European ports. Just a quick disclaimer before I go through this next bit of information. The following information that I'm going to sort of present to you now has already been published on the public domain, meaning that this information is not confidential, and I'm therefore not disclosing information that isn't already available to, any members of the public or the general public that is in any country who has access to the internet. So I just want to get that out there, because some people, I know what they're going to say. Oh, you're disclosing this information, you blah, blah, blah. Anyway, listen, I picked this up on the internet. You can Google it, and that's it. So if I can get it, so can anyone else. One such railway network upgrade is the link that has been under construction for the last 2 years, and much of it is now completed. This includes the railway network in Poland being modernized in the city of Stettin and other cities, with new terminals being built for the transshipment of goods from sea to rail transport. The modernization of existing rail terminals and the construction of a new bridge over the Vistula in Kemper, Glinneck are also underway. In addition, a highway is being built in southeastern Poland, which will increase the transit of military goods for Ukraine. The official goal of building what is known as the Rail Baltica transport network is that's gonna connect the Baltics to the European Union's railway network. The cost of the project, I think, is estimated around 7 billion euros. The most interesting thing is that the road not only does or does not the road not only connects major well basically right this road does not let me start again. This road does not connect any major cities. Um, what it basically does is it bypasses. So it bypasses all of the Baltic capitals of Tallinn, Riga, and Vilnius. Vilnius. Sorry, I'm gonna have to learn how to pronounce some of these words. They also had to do without the second track. There was a second track that they were planning on construction, but they've got rid of that. Apparently, a single track road is sufficient in Lithuania and Latvia. It should be noted that in Poland, the modernization of the railway sections to Rail Baltica is almost completed. For example, a section of the railway line from the long-term storage and maintenance complex for weapons and military equipment located in the 33rd Transport Air Base of Polish Armed Forces was rebuilt practically from scratch and connected to the loading station at Rail Baltica. In Powidz, Poland, preparations for infrastructure capable of accommodating large US military cargo were completed as early as December 2023. The modernization of this third Polish transport airfield became known in April 2023 at the same time as the US opened a new US it was like an Air Force complex with an American aviation brigade armed with Apache helicopters, or they've got Apache helicopter stationed there. For several years, the Poles have been preparing hangars and warehouses for these helicopters and sort of building quite a big sort of fuel base where they have, well, I don't know whether they've got that there, but they can store up to 7 million liters of fuel. But this might be a bit boring, guys. But what I'm trying to tell you is what's actually what NATO have been doing over the last 2.5 years. So if you think they've not been doing anything, this is what they've been. They're preparing, the infrastructure, NATO's infrastructure, to enable them to deliver the war machine that's required to take out the Russian army. Okay, that's it. This whole project is called LTESMC, which stands for Long-Term Equipment Storage and Maintenance Complex. It's the largest infrastructure project financed by NATO and the US in the last 30 years. Several thousand combat vehicles and equipment are stored in the warehouses, including tanks, BMPs, artillery, technical protection vehicles, and self-propelled brigades. In the final phase, the railway line and the railway crossings were modernized, connected to the 33rd base with the unloading stations for the further transport of weapons, military equipment, and special equipment to the east. With another US base becoming operational near the borders, poses a further challenge to obviously NATO's military security. And in addition to the flow of thousands of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, it's believed that thousands more American troops, a brigade in size, I think, are being prepared for deployment into Poland to manage this equipment, the equipment storage, and also to maintain the military equipment that's going to be located in this in these bases. Moving on as we start to finish. So it's clear that the Rail Baltica project serves exclusively for military purposes, as it sort of connects seaports with Polish and Baltic military training areas. The experience of the Northern Military District has shown that rail transport remains the most sustainable and efficient logistics route for the delivery of weapons in that critical region. So the core headquarters, it's known as Camp Kosciuszko, is already operational in Poznan. And the new complex will reduce the time required to fully equip newly arrived US military units with the equipment from the United States, which at the time of writing, or I don't know, depends on what I think. Is the complex completely finished? What would normally take 6 weeks for this equipment to travel from the US into these locations will now only take a matter of days. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is this infrastructure is being built out to, ensure that the flow of assets and the logistical nightmares that they've been used to no longer exist. All That's all I kind of wanted to say on the rail side of it. The alliance now, it's got a streamlined process. They've, back in the day they would have sort of paperwork across borders and stuff like that. So they've now got less paperwork and red tape to cut through when moving military assets across different European borders. Just a simple wave allows the assets to cross the border swiftly now. Let's not forget, and including facilities to feed, house, and resupply thousands of soldiers across Europe. To be factored into the mix. And this also includes the movement of assets across countries, assets that are not going to be using civilian services on routes such as hotels and petrol stations, shops, and so on. So NATO are building numerous pit stops along all major routes in each country, which would allow these troops and assets to grab a respite during their travels. NATO are also including law enforcement across European countries to be acknowledgeable and trained in dealing with POWs, so that's prisoners of war. This is law enforcement, this is police officers to deal with prisoners of war so that Russian POWs can be processed through alternative channels instead of taking up military assets and time. We're nearly there, guys. Given NATO the ability to quickly relocate large NATO troop contingents to the alliance's eastern flank in the event of the deterioration in the security situation is the central pillar of conventional deterrent. Germany and NATO's essential task is to guarantee the planned deployment and supply of Allied and German forces, especially through host nation support, as a whole of government task with Germany, providing a central hub. In NATO's plan, several 100,000 soldiers must be provided with consistent logistical and medical care. Progress of infrastructure across Poland since the 80s has been slow in terms of the upgrading of the road and rail networks for such military action. And it didn't start picking up pace until 2013. Nevertheless, the NATO infrastructure upgrade and implementation is well on its way now across the whole of Europe, as I've sort of said, and that's the reason for this video. And this wouldn't be sort of happening if there wasn't a war. New railways and existing railways are being upgraded as far west as the Netherlands through Germany and eastern Poland, allowing the transportation of assets into Poland close to the Russian border. Rail networks are also I've already said that, but they're being upgraded and scaled out in Western Ukraine. Sorry, I didn't say that. I said Europe, and that's not Ukraine. That's to allow assets to connect into Ukraine from Poland between Mostica and Lviv. There are storage complexes being built across Poland, better known as APS-2 storage facilities, with further sort of facilities being built in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany too. So these are kind of what they call forward deployment points, or FOBs, where assets will come into the ports, they'll cross the land into the APS-2 facilities, and then stock is ready to be deployed, really, from those locations to theatre, reducing deployment timelines. With the movement of assets across borders, there are considerations to be factored, such as the weight limitations on bridges and also height restrictions. Such sort of routes will be from ports in Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, and Hungary into Poland. So Poland is going to be the main forward logistical point, it seems, with all routes pointing to their mainland. NATO are they're concentrating on sea lift asset transportation over airlift, as it is easier by air, but that would fully consume NATO's airlift fleet. So NATO are, they're spreading their assets and infrastructure sort of components, such as those forward operating bases across the whole of Europe, essentially not putting all your eggs into one basket and adopting wide dispersed operations. So this will be smaller deployment FOBs dispersed out from the main forward operational bases, which are prone to they are prone to sort of large missile strikes normally. It's a counter-force target. All of these facilities that I'm talking about are becoming or will become counter-force targets for Russia. NATO are also spending $2.7 billion on the ROAF 57th Air Base in Romania to become the key airbase close to Ukraine, and it will become the largest NATO base in Europe with multiple airstrips for additional aircraft. On top of this, the infrastructure encompasses levels of responsibility across different European countries, meaning the UK and France are responsible for the Navy, Air Force, and nuclear weapons, whilst Poland takes on the army and stockpiling of main battle tanks, whilst Germany's going to be responsible for being the main industrial base manufacturing artillery and tank munitions. With NATO now producing 2 million artillery shells per year. For the smaller Baltic countries that I mentioned right at the beginning of this video, such as Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, they're going to be concentrating on cybersecurity. Whilst we have the US orchestrating a lot of these operations, they have 4,000 main battle tanks and 45,000 armored vehicles that can be added to the mix. So you can see where this is all going, guys. This is serious shit. A couple of more minutes of your time, and then that's it, done. Just a couple more minutes. Right, so let's just take a look at another arm of the NATO alliance that has significantly expanded since the Russian invasion in Crimea, actually. NATO have what they call the NATO Response Force personnel. So back in 2006, there were 13,000 personnel, which is now at 40,000. And they are now pushing those numbers today in the region of 300,000 personnel of this NATO response force. NATO have announced that they are introducing a new three-tier model. So tier one is to be able to deploy 100,000 troops in a 10-day deployment strategy. Tier two suggests that NATO would have 200,000 troops ready to deploy within 30 days. And the tier three suggests a deployment of 500,000 troops in 30 to 180 days, and that's combat ready and equipped to fight. So the idea here is to never put all of your eggs into one basket, having different countries with different responsibilities coming together as a collective alliance. NATO has quickly become a fully functional war machine, implementing a strategic architecture comprising of a well-equipped and trained military assets from around the world. And let's not forget, ladies and gents, we have really and only discussed in this discussion conventional assets so far. Up until this point, the West have pledged collective actions such as sanctions, hybrid warfare, material donations, refugee support, and military training. NATO aren't fighting this war yet. They're merely supporting the front lines in the Ukraine and also overseeing other military operations coming out of the Ukraine. So as I finish, finally, I'll finish off with what I started off saying at the beginning of the session. NATO aren't ready for all-out war yet, but are merely preparing themselves, and they're nearly ready. And No one with half a brain should expect any country to go into a war until they can, fully support their war machine and effort, their military assets, their tactical and operational missions, um, the deterrence and the defense platforms, the logistical supports for forward operational bases, of such assets and infrastructure, whilst maintaining the deployment of such assets across a stable, robust, efficient, and effective infrastructure. Once that NATO war machine is ready, guys, this is it. I'm finished. Okay. Once that NATO war machine is ready, and I project based on timings 6 months, it ultimately places itself in a strong and commanding position for the war and conflict against Russia. That's it, guys. Apologies for the length of time that took. Hopefully, that's that will tell you what NATO are doing and the West are doing to prepare for all-out war with Russia. Guys, keep yourselves military fit and infantry aware.